this has a high hurdle yet to clear, as it passed with just the required number of Democrat votes to get it over to the Senate side. But it essentially does at the federal level what you see moving at state and local levels, including in Chicago, to impose mandates on police departments that, according to House Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, would result in the loss of 3,000 police officers from the streets around the country because of the mandates that would be imposed on local police departments per this federal legislation. But this is the impetus of the defund the police movement, do through mandates, what you can't necessarily do simply through budget cutting. And this was a topic of conversation back at the height of the civil unrest and violence throughout America last summer into the fall. June of 2020, The Daily Show hosted a roundtable discussion on Black Lives Matter and the defund the police movement. This has been recommended for viewing by educators. I mentioned the other week, suburban Chicago, the alma mater of one Hillary Clinton, Maine East High School, recommended the teachers watch this roundtable discussion, which included, among others, Brooklyn College, sociology professor Alex Vitale on abolishing the police. And here's what Professor Vitale had to say.
It's really more about a process driven by a set of principles than it is some predetermined outcome. I think what we're seeing on the streets today when people say defund the police, yes, it's about these immediate changes that Patrice is talking about, but it's also about a generation of young people, crying out for a world that isn't driven by racial and class inequalities that are enforced by policing. And the sad truth is that has been the role that police have played in American society, enforcers of systems that produce these inequalities. And every time we turn a problem over to them, it makes those inequalities worse in the long run. Mm-hmm. So police abolition is about trying to reduce the burden of policing today while we work to build something better for the future.
For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Professor Alex Vitale, Professor of Sociology and Coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Movement at Brooklyn College. He's also the author of the book, The End of Policing. Professor, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan.
Develop this end of policing thesis. I've read a good portion of your book, and what the end of policing would give birth to in terms of the way to preserve order in a free society.
Well, thanks for having me on, Dan. And, first I want to say that actually I'm not a big fan of the House bill. I don't think it particularly is consistent with the defund the police movement.
Doesn't go far enough.
Well, it's not only that it doesn't go far enough, it doesn't approach the problem in the right way. In fact, some of these mandates that you're concerned about are mandates that I don't agree with either.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to fix policing with implicit bias training or de-escalation training. The officers involved in the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis had all that training. Were wearing body cameras. They had all the changes to use of force policies, and it just didn't matter. It just didn't make a difference. The evidence is pretty clear that a lot of these mandates don't work. And I don't think the problem with policing in the United States can be, captured by just saying, well, cops are racist, and if we just give them sensitivity training that this is going to fix it. I think this is not the way to understand the problem. I think the way to understand the problem is to say, look, we've turned every social problem under the sun over to the police to manage. We've both made these problems worse, like mass homelessness, mass untreated mental health and substance abuse problems, failed schools. And then when those problems emerge, we say, well, let's give that all to the police. And I think even a lot of police understand that this is a mistake. They don't want to be in the mental health business. They don't want to be in the homeless outreach business. They don't want to really be in charge of youth discipline in schools. And so the defund the police movement is saying, look, we need to rethink our budget priorities. Instead of increasing the police budget every year, maybe we need to put more resources into school counselors, into community-based mental health services, into housing first programs, into high-quality drug treatment. And that's really the key demand of this movement. And the bill that passed in Washington doesn't do any of that.
Well, how do you feel about social workers showing up for domestic violence calls with police officers?
Well, I would rather see preventative services in the communities, family crisis centers, so that we don't have so many 911 calls. And then we should have an ability to assess whether or not sending a police officer at all is in fact the right decision in a case-by-case basis. We're doing that in some cities already around things like mental health crisis calls, and there are some examples in different places of how we might reduce the police role on domestic violence calls as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of argument about reining in the mission creep that has occurred with policing that you're describing. I think the issue is the defund and police abolition movement, which my sense is that you're generally supportive of, and how that would impact the core mission of policing, which is the solving and to some extent the prevention of violent crime in particular.
So I think there's been a kind of intentional misrepresentation of the movement. No one who's really doing this work on the ground imagines that there's some magical switch that they can flip and tomorrow, poof, all police will be gone. This is about a process of interrogating the scope of policing and trying to implement evidence-based alternatives in as many arenas as we can, including a lot of arenas around violence. We have a growing body of research that shows that community-based anti-violence strategies can be much more effective at policing in reducing shootings and homicides. These are things like credible messenger movements, hospital-based trauma counseling. There are a lot of different, including changes to physical design issues, improving street lighting. There's a real sense that we can't just flip the switch and tomorrow there are no police, but we can begin to invest in alternatives to policing, and we can pursue that process as far as we can reasonably go with that.
Well, do you then concede that the evidence suggests that the number of police has a effect on crime, especially violent crime, and when crime soars, not only do direct victims suffer, but you run the risk of cities or neighborhoods, if not cities generally, unraveling?
So the defund the police movement is a public safety movement that is led overwhelmingly by people from communities with high levels of violence and other kind of crime, and for whom policing has not been an adequate strategy for them. So they're trying to figure out investments in community-based strategies that will make them safer than they are now. The research on police effectiveness is very mixed. And even the few studies that show, we increased a few officers here and we got a 3% reduction in burglaries or something, that doesn't mean that if we add 10,000 more officers, we'll get a 10 times bigger reduction in crime. There's absolutely no evidence to support that.
Well,
and there's no correlation between the number of police officers per capita and crime rates, and there never has been such a correlation.
Well, perhaps there's diminishing marginal returns at some point. I don't know exactly what that point is, but I do know, there was a study done in 2018 by a couple of academics that looked at police and crime data from large and mid-sized cities for a 50-year period, 1960 to 2010, and they estimated that for every dollar spent on extra police generated about $1.63 in social benefits, primarily by reducing murders. And I ask again about whether or not you believe that policing is the appropriate mechanism to try to solve, and by solving, prevent violent crimes?
So there are several problems with that study, which was done by some economists who have actually no experience with policing or public safety. First of all, that cost-benefit calculation assumes that a life saved is worth some magically made-up dollar figure, which is around $5 million.
Lifetime earnings.
And then it does nothing, but this is not actually the lifetime earnings of most of the people who are killed, unfortunately. But also, this is a kind of perverse way of thinking about it. The other thing is that they never for a second calculate other costs of policing, not just the cost of the spending, but the cost of the killings that police engage in. Police commit about 8% of all homicides in the United States, legal or otherwise. They also never consider whether or not there are different investments that could pay even higher returns. This is never calculated either.
Well, 8% of homicides, legal or otherwise. The legal matters. The otherwise is the issue. The legal is not. So the 1,000 people that are killed by police, I mean, whether it's a justified, whether it's justified or not matters.
And lives lost. If we're just measuring the cost and lives lost, that calculation should be added into the cost of policing.
Well, fine, but you cannot conflate justified use of lethal force from unjustified use of lethal force.
Unless we can provide evidence that says we could save those lives without killing anyone, which is, I feel like, what we can do.
So you started in that bite I played from your appearance on The Daily Show last year, talking about how police enforce these systems of oppression, racism in poor communities. Well, that apparently is going unnoticed by the overwhelming majority of the residents of those poor communities, because a Gallup survey last year had 80% of Black Americans want the same or more police presence where they live.
Yes, well, for 40 years, we've told those residents that they can have one and only one thing to produce safety in their communities, and that's more police. And so when we ask them, would you rather have more police or nothing, they say, guess what, we would like more police, even though those same surveys show deep dissatisfaction with policing. What we're trying to say is that we want to give people other choices to make than just policing. And more recent surveys after this summer's public conversations about alternatives to policing show actually a significant growth in public interest in non-police strategies.
And what is your assessment of, and at whatever pace you suggest, of what the impact would be on crime, particularly violent crime, reducing police forces while you're, I guess, energizing this replacement for said police?
Well, so in Denver, they just released 6 months of data about diverting 911 calls away from police into mental health outreach teams. The results were incredibly positive. It reduced the need for policing. It's saving the city money. We have similar results from other cities. We have a lot of research about community-based anti-violence strategies that work better than policing. We just need to start implementing more of these things, evaluating the results, taking it one step at a time, and reducing the scope of policing. So it's not about giving police more work to do because there are fewer of them. It's about taking away whole areas of responsibility where we just shouldn't be using police in the first place.
But again, the specific area of responsibility, responding to 911 calls involving an alleged crime, an alleged act of violence, is that the purview of police, or is that the purview of community anti-policing initiatives, in your view?
Well, look, in Chicago, only about 5% of all 911 calls have anything remotely to do with violence. And in the vast majority of those cases, the police response is well after the violence has already occurred. So let's be realistic about this, right? Police are not catching armed robbers in the act. That is a once-in-a-career achievement for a patrol officer. 95% of what police do has nothing to do with that. So let's start scaling all that stuff back.
Well, yeah, but community response teams and mental health professionals aren't going to catch people in the act either. They're responsive and reactive in nature, generally speaking. Police presence in an area matters, number one. Number two, police expertise and training with respect to maintaining the peace, if you will, maintaining order, and then going about solving the crimes with detectives and so forth. I mean, I'm not clear whether or not you think that is the legitimate purview of police if they're going to exist, or you don't think so and they shouldn't exist at all.
Well, look, I certainly agree that if we just disappeared all police tomorrow, there would be, really horrible negative consequences for that. But that's not what I'm proposing. What I'm talking about is incrementally using evidence-based strategies to dial back policing in as many ways as we can. And I think the evidence shows we could do that for a huge amount of what police do right now.
He is Alex Vitale. He's a professor of sociology and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College. He's also the author of The End of Policing. Professor Vitale, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you, Alex. And he joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
What do you think is going to happen to our tax rates over the next few years? We all know the answer to that. Congress is going to have to pay for all the stimulus spending, trillions of dollars worth. So what could that mean for you? Higher taxes. Now is the time to protect 401k, IRA, and other investment accounts from future tax hikes. Tom Fortino and the team at the Alpha Wealth Group can help you do that. Tom can show you how forward tax planning can potentially save you money. How can someone give you investment advice without actually understanding the tax implications on that advice? If you're serious about retirement and have saved $250,000 or more, call Tom Fortino now at 630-934-1855 and get started today. Don't let tax hikes catch you off guard. Call 630-934-1855 and online at alphawealthgroup.com. Advisory services through Retirement Wealth Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Insurance and annuities offered through Alpha Wealth Group, licensed in Illinois.
All right, I just did it. Took the balance of nature, do it every day, give it to the kids, give it to my mother. My mom's seen a great improvement. She sleeps better at night. She's able to walk up that hill near her home, which she was not able to do a few months ago. So this is what it is. It's 6 capsules. You're getting 10 servings of 31 different fruits and veggies. There's no preservatives. There's no dyes. It's GMO, gluten-free. I crack open the capsules in warm water and drink that every day. I love it. I've got more energy. Blood pressure's down. Skin's looking better. It's all good. No problems here. Here's the number to call, 800-246-8751, 800-246-8751. Use discount code Chicago and start your journey to better health today. Come on. What are you waiting for? Right now, free shipping and 35% for newcomers. 800-246-8751 or go online to balanceofnature.com. Discount code